Hello, welcome to Flory Models. I'm Philip Flory, airbrushing. Okay, maybe you're new to it, maybe you're struggling with it, maybe you're an old pro at it and just want to learn some techniques. What we're going to do over the next series of videos we're going to be looking at is how airbrushes first of all work, how to clean them, how to set them up, all the basics, things like that. We're going to talk about in a moment various paints. Why is there so many on the market? Why isn't there a good one? And why some work better than others? And we'll talk about thinners, things like that. We're going to be looking at obviously the basics, laying down colour. We've got our models in front of us that if you've been following the series you'll know well. So we've got a Harrier down here. We're going to be looking at how to break up a solid colour like grey. For instance, this Harrier is going to just be grey. We're going to show about pre-shading, post-shading, fading, things like that to break it up. Very, very simple. How to do camo right the way from using masks, soft edge masks, hard edge masks, and then obviously we're going to be looking at freehand, how to get best effects and things like that. Right along over to the vampire at the end where we're going to be looking at actually doing metallic paint and the fors and against of metallic paints and the different brands that are available and things like that. So what we've got down here is just a little collection, and it's my set. You know, I've been doing this a while now, so you tend to buy all these things. The reasons I've got them and the fors and against and things like that. Now, as you can see down here, obviously this is the interesting bit, is my airbrush collection. Now down here we've got at the beginning, this is the little Iwata Neo. This is the CN version. Beautiful airbrush, for the money, is a complete bargain. It's very limited on what it can do, and there's a couple of things I don't like about it. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But if you are starting out on airbrushing, I highly recommend this airbrush. Obviously you've heard different names probably mentioned. You get Badger, Iwata, Harder and Steenbeck, things like that and so forth. There's lots of different manufacturers out there. The only thing I will say is spend your money wisely, i.e. go on the internet, get lots of reviews for it. Obviously I'll give you my opinion on these and the fors and against, and find out really what you're going to be using it for. So if you're doing quite large things, you're not going to need anything too precise and pinpoint. You can get away with perhaps the cheaper airbrush, shall I say, whereas if you want to do highly detailed, very fine work every day, you know, you're going to want to spend a little bit more money to get that detail and to certainly get that reliability and all things like that. So that's the Iwata Neo. Lovely airbrush for generally coming into the hobby and doing everything to a point. Okay, that point being, if you want to do very fine detailed work, you might want to look for something a little bit like these later airbrushes, but certainly for starting out I highly recommend it. Next up, a little bit more expensive, around about the £100 mark, is the Harder and Steenbeck Evolution. Now I've had this airbrush now for the best part of 15 years. Okay, it's still all there. It's a little bit faded when you put it near other colours and things like that. Obviously it's had new internals, it's had new seals, new needles, new air caps, needle caps, things like that. But I can highly recommend this airbrush. Again, for the money, I think it's probably the best in its category. It's limited in what it can do, a little bit like the Neo, as we'll look at the other airbrushes in a moment, but certainly this one you can fit into any type of you know, needle set. You can go up and down the sizes, really, really easy, very easy to maintain, clean and set up, okay, which is what we'll be looking about shortly. Okay, this is the Iwata Eclipse. They have different versions of this one. This is the HPCS version. It is a beautiful airbrush. I use this one not as much as I could. I tend to be a fan more of the Harder and Steenbeck airbrushes, but this particular airbrush, I must admit, I have used it and it is an absolute delight to use. There's a few things that I think are better on this one, as we'll speak about when we start stripping them down and looking at them in more detail, but certainly I think for the money you're going to be looking around about the £100 to £150 mark on this one. Pretty much does everything you would ever need an airbrush to do, and it will do it with detail and it will do it day in, day out, as we'll look about a little bit later on. My favourite airbrush of all, quite frankly, is the Harder and Steenbeck Infinity. It has all the features of the Evolution down here. It's just got a few more little things down here at the back, whereas we can actually set up the tension on the trigger. We can set up the actual needle point to actually lock it into a particular, you know, state, so the needle only comes back so far, and then you can unlock with ease. You can get to all the parts really, really simply and easy. Again, easy to set up, clean and everything else, and day in and day out it's really handy. And I do like this open needle guard purely for speed of cleaning. You know, no more messing around of trying to get in. You can literally just get in there and clean it instantly. So that's your airbrushes. Personal choice on this one. Really, you want to look at your budget. Okay, if money's no issue, go out and get the best airbrush you can. Simple as that. Okay, but don't forget, you're going to need a compressor to go with it. Now, my compressors, to be honest, I have them silenced. They are behind me in the cupboard behind. I have two in there. I have a very old, just a tank, and the actual motor on the top. It's got no auto stop start. It's literally, you turn it on, it fills up the tank, and then you can use it. No problem with that at all. Just make sure you have got a moisture trap. A moisture trap is very important somewhere. I should have got it out earlier, but I forgot. Let's grab mine. This is my backup. To be honest, it's my old moisture trap. You need something like this. This one basically fits anywhere. On my old setting, I used to have it in line. It used to be actually on my bench, so I could just dial in what air pressure I actually wanted. You just twist it down and then lock it to that air pressure. Every time you pull the trigger, you will just get that amount of air coming through. And then obviously down here we have a moisture trap, which is great because as soon as you get a little bit of moisture, i.e. if you're in quite high humidity, it stops the water going to your airbrush, because then it affects your paint pattern, your paint itself certainly, and spitting. Okay, it traps it down in here, and every now and again you can just let it out the bottom and it hisses out the bottom. I've got a better, to be honest, one in there now, compressor, and it's got a better moisture trap on it. You can also get them that fit right on the bottom of your gun, just down here. Okay, pretty much, you know, if you're in very high humidity, you might want it closer to the gun. I'm in the UK, we're in the southwest, it's pretty damp down here all the time, and I manage with these. These things, anything from 15 to 25 pounds, pretty much a must. So you can just connect your hoses onto it. You'll find most modern air compressors will come with it. What I don't recommend is using cans. Aerosol cans, false economy, you spend a fortune with them. The airflow goes up and down. One minute you've got great pressure, the next minute it drops down, you turn the can, it freezes. Honestly, for the sake of, what, 20 cans, you go and buy a good compressor for that. And that's what I would say. So when you're thinking about setting it up, think to yourself, okay, I've got, I don't know, £200 to spend. And you think, okay, I can go out and I can buy a brilliant airbrush for this. But the trouble with that is you need some money for a compressor as well. So perhaps go down the line a bit, Evolution or a Neo, something else like that, just to start with. Get yourself a compressor, and hopefully a compressor will last you a lifetime anyway. Then you're going to need a hose, personal choice. I just got a standard sort of braided hose down here with a quick release on the end, and we'll talk about those when we're talking about setting up your airbrush and things like that. Paints, okay, obviously you probably use paints if you're moving on to airbrushing, so you might have got your favourites. You might be an enamel painter, something like that. When you're looking at airbrushing your paint, everything changes, because what will happen then is your consistencies will need to be a lot thinner, obviously for atomising going through your airbrush, and then certain colours aren't available to certain manufacturers, shall we say. So you've all seen my board at the back here. I've got a selection of probably 4 or 5 brands up there of paints I use. I don't have the entire ranges of all the colours, because what I tend to do is pick out what I think are the best colours for a particular area. For instance, Mr. Colour here, which is actually, this is the enamel or the lacquer thinners for it. Okay, for the hobby colour, which is the acrylic version, we'll speak about these in depth when we're setting it up. They do great colours for modern stuff. Okay, so I'm thinking things like Israeli colours. Fantastic, straight off the bat, you can just go through, I've got them just there. We've got these numbers here, H310 to, I've got to think which one it is now, H313. That's your Israeli colours, no problem with those at all. Also things like UK colours, brilliant, and everything else. Then you have to think about how the paint actually works. It's more like your standard paint, you sort of thin it 50-50, but it's as hard as nails, okay? It's very, very strong, very, very durable, okay? Trouble with it was you couldn't find it in the UK readily a few years ago. Now it's over here, no problem at all. A few years ago was a bit of a problem, so getting it was a little bit harder. So sometimes you might think, okay, we'll go for a second option of paints, things like that. So you might have to look around for another brand to be able to get those particular ones. So then you might look at things like Life Colour paints, Tamiya paints, Italeri, things like that, and that's why we've got down here. But basically we've got here we've got the Vallejo range, okay? Comes in two flavours. Model Air, okay, which means it's straight thinned in the bottle. You go straight to your colour cup and you can spray it, no problem at all. Or you can have the model colour ones. These are very thick, they need to be thinned before they go in the airbrush and everything else like that. Do a great range of paints, lots and lots of them available. Life colour. To be honest, I had loads of trouble spraying this stuff until very recently when I was told, you know, really shown how to use it properly. Again, the paint is, I've got no problem with the paint at all, it's just it's very soft to handle. It's not handleable at all. You have to be careful how you actually handle the model, otherwise you can rub through it. Very much like the Vallejo stuff as well. If you handle your model a lot and you're, you know, spraying it, you can easily wear through the paint. So just be a little bit careful when you're doing that. Tamiya paint, old favourite of mine. Been around many years in the UK, firm favourite. The thinners are great, okay, and you just mix it 50-50 is a great starting point, and away you go. New but one on the town, we've got Italeri do their own paint range at now. It's quite limited, tends to come in sets. I haven't used it extensively yet. I wanted to get it just to see what it was like. First impressions, to be honest, I only used it once. It seems to be quite good. As you notice with all of these, they've got their own thinners, and this is a great place to start. If you can get their own thinners, you will find they will probably work better. For instance, Vallejo paints work fantastically with Vallejo thinners, all right? Really easy. The mixing's very straightforward and it works. Obviously things like Life Colour with Life Colour paints works really well. Tamiya, I think their thinners, if I'm honest, is probably the best on the market. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. It seems to have a few little extra ingredients which help slow down drying times, things like that. And they can go in, and then certainly we've got this one which is like a milky colour, looks a little bit funny, to go with the Italeri ones. Again, does a fantastic job. The trouble you find is if you go around mixing different people's thinners with paints, sometimes you can get funny little reactions. Okay, also people will tell you can use things like screen wash and stuff like that. Yes, you can, it does work, but it's a little bit iffy if it will work with your paint. Some colours of paint particularly work better mixing than others, okay? So you might want, if you're just starting out, use the own brand to your own type of thinners, okay? And go right the way through, because you can't really go wrong with things like that. So what we're going to do now, we'll just have a quick clear of these away, and we're going to have a look now, strip down an airbrush and show you exactly what it does. Okay, so you got your compressor, you got your hose, you got your airbrush. I would always recommend taking your airbrush apart to start with. Just familiarise yourself with the parts, how it actually should be when it's clean, because when it's covered in paint, sometimes it can be a little bit worrying to know where things go. Now, all airbrushes roughly work the same. Basically, you'll have air comes up the bottom, gets to the trigger, pushing down 9 times out of 10, okay, will deliver the air. Depending on how far you push down, releases the, as we'll talk about in a moment, the nipple, which releases the air, which then shoots down a channel down the side of the airbrush, comes to the front, and then blows air out the front. At the same time, you'll have paint, which will either come from the top here. So this is what we call a gravity feed, okay, because it's the weight of the gravity pushes the paint down. It goes along, tracks along the needle, which goes through all of this, gets caught with the vortex of the air, which drags it out of the needle, gets it to the point of the needle, and then atomizes it. And that is your beautiful spray pattern, is what you'll be doing great pieces of work with very quickly. So let's have a look. If we just take apart a couple of the airbrushes. So if we just start with 2 Iowattas, I can show you a little difference. Unscrewing the back, okay, this is the collet, which is for your needle, okay. This little guy here is what actually holds the needle in place. It clamps it to the trigger mechanism, which is a bar that runs down through the back, okay. So by releasing that, you can release the needle, which my needle, to be honest, is a little bit dirty. Okay, there's your needle. Keep that safe, don't stab yourself. Do the collet up just a little bit, stop it falling off. Down the front end, what you'll have is, we do it in order. First of all, you take off the end. This is your needle guard, okay? This is the actual bit that stops the needle from actually getting bent, stabbing yourself, and everything else like that. There's different types of these. This is what we call a crown type, okay? But basically, it hasn't got any holes in it. Which is, there's a little technique you can use for mixing paint, things like that if you wanted to, but personally I prefer the 2-prong because it's easier to clean out, but it's a great way of protecting your needle. Then you have your end cap, okay. Now the end cap should just unscrew like so, and that's your part here. What happens is air comes through this small little hole, you can probably see, or hopefully you can see. We just move this camera in just a little bit tighter. You can probably see you've got a little hole just at the bottom here. This is where your air comes in. It goes into this little chamber here and then gets thrown out the front because it can only go out one way. That's what pulls all your air through. Now, this is where things get a little bit difficult and tricky. On the end here, this tiny little guy at the end, this is actually your nozzle. Okay, this is actually one of the business parts of your airbrush that you want to keep safe, clean, and obviously not bend it or sort of damaged in any way, because that needs to be perfectly square on the end. If it's not, if it's got tears, splits, it releases the paint at different intervals, things like that. It doesn't travel along the needle evenly all the way around, and it ends up, and that's when sometimes you'll spray, you'll get it coming out at funny angles, doing more one side than the other. Normally it's damaged on here. Now this particular one is welded on, it doesn't pull out. You have to physically unscrew it, and actually what you have is a little tool. Actually, I might be able to unscrew this. No, it's on there pretty tight. You have a little tool which can unscrew this and take this tiny little piece off. Trouble with these is they can snap, okay? And when they snap, sometimes you can't get it off the end. You have to send them back to be fixed, everything else. It has always been my bugbear with Iwata airbrushes, purely because of that happening, but once that's ruined, you have to say goodbye to your airbrush for a few weeks before you can get it back, okay? Other thing down here, we have the air stem. They're all slightly different on different airbrushes. This is a spring driven little guy just down here that you sort of push down, and as you push down it releases air in through this little hole down the side here. It comes up in through the hole you might be able to see in the bottom there, and then that's how it travels through. Again, good maintenance on these, all these parts is well worth it, okay? And that's basically disassembling your airbrush. To pop it back together, we'll just pop the end on and the outside cap, I think, the needle guard, okay, and then the needle slacking off that chuck just a little bit, a little collet, push all the way through, little tap, don't ram it right through because you're going to split the end, okay, and then you just screw up the end and goes on, and then you should find it should be all snappy and good to go. Now, slight differences. This particular airbrush, as you can see, has got a hole in the back. This, you can release the actual collet from the back here, but what you can do is you can pull the needle back without having to take the end cap off. That's all that is, okay? It comes in very handy if you need to clean the needle, okay? If perhaps, you know, you can't get to this motion of pulling it back, you can retract the needle all the way back, no problem at all. Unscrew the back, undo the collet, out comes the needle, exactly the same way, okay? And then if we take the front off, so if we just do the end cap again first, and then what you have is a secondary one down here. If we take this guy off, what you actually have, this is slightly different, it's what we call a free floating needle, nozzle, sorry. So what you've got is that tiny bit on the end still, but if that was to sort of break, play up, you can still get it off because this part here just comes away from the end, and you can see the hole there very, very easily. But you see this here is a separate part, so you can easily change it, and that's what I like about this airbrush, because if this end bit gets snaps off something else, you can buy the entire part and then just send this back to be fixed rather than losing your entire airbrush basically. Because it's a floating variety, you can just pop it in the end there, okay, on with the end, screw him up, end goes on, and then usual as we said before, needle goes in, do up, back goes on, and you're good to go. Again, snappiness all the way through. Okay, to be honest, we'll do it on this particular one. This is the Infinity, okay, works exactly the same way. So we've got this reaction where we can pull this trigger set back here. You know, it's needle guards on, there we go, exactly the same way. But what we have got in here is a little ring. This is for tensioning up the actual trigger itself. You can make the trigger firmer or softer. It's one of those slightly gimmicky things because when you're pulling it, it doesn't matter. But if you were on using your airbrush every day, then perhaps you would want to trim it slightly. So exactly the same. End cap comes off. Unscrew the back, needle comes out the back, and then on this particular guy, if we can get the bottom off as well. We have the air stem, exactly the same design, it's just the hole on here is a little bit bigger, but we have the little nipple on the top which you would push down. It's on a spring, okay, and that, so like that. You can adjust the spring on these. If I screw it in the bottom, purely because it's easier to get the bottom one off, you can adjust the trigger, okay, at the top by tightening up the little slot headed screw down there. Obviously clockwise tightens it up, makes this trigger a lot firmer and also makes the distance it travels shorter. Okay, by slackening it off, the trigger will go further down. It gives you greater range of movement when you're actually spraying. Again, these are little things you probably won't worry about to start with, but trust me, as things go on, you can. Now, different type of airbrush. So actually what you have here is the end cap and nozzle in one. Okay, this little guard does come off the end. It is solely for the Infinity, okay, but the great thing is with all of these airbrushes, the Hardware and Steenbeck variety, these, all the parts are interchangeable, so you can take this off and pop it on this one, vice versa, as you go right the way through. But again, maintenance for these is very simple, because when these break you just replace it, you don't have to send it all off, and everything else, changing the seals, things like that, is all very easy. So we just screw the front on, pop the needle in the back, small tap, screw it up, end cap on, and then again you're looking for snappiness in the trigger. You want it all to be free movement. If you got it where it's slow, normally it's paint build up on the needle or in the seals, things like that, and it just makes things a little bit sluggish, which can be a bit of a problem when you're doing tiny little areas and you want to shut the paint off and you let go of the needle and it runs on. Okay, but these are all little things we'll cover later on when we're doing troubleshooting and everything else. So that's your airbrushes. As I said, we just got two manufacturers here for their different price breaks and things like that. Personally, any airbrush, they all roughly do the same thing. It's like cars. At the end of the day, you'll get a guy, and he's a Ford guy, he's been driving Ford all his life, and he will only ever buy a Ford car, okay? He wouldn't drive a Honda or something else if you paid him, all right? Not to say that Honda's no good, it's just that particular person likes that type. You tend to find that with airbrushes. Guys who get on with a certain airbrush will just stick with it and carry on with it forevermore. Personally, I have people in here all the time who I teach airbrushing to and things like that, just as I'm doing with you today. Exactly the same thing. One thing I would recommend, if you can, go to somewhere like here or a dealer who doesn't just deal in Iwata, in Harder and Steenbeck, in Badger or whatever. Okay, do one who's an independent, who's got them all there. Have a go and have a play with all of them. Just remember, airbrushes, there's various things with airbrushes you have to remember. Needle size is probably the most important. Iwata tend to come with a 0.35 needle, okay? Harder and Steenbeck's standard size is 0.2. You would think being 0.2 and 0.35, the smaller the needle, the smaller the line. Not necessarily. The Harder and Steenbeck will go right down to a 0.15 millimeter. The thing is lethal, it's like a piece of hair. Trust me, if you drop it on your foot, you really will know about it. I've done it. Okay, but the thing is, when you get to a certain size, and I always say anything smaller than 2 mil, all right, acrylic paint, which is what we'll be using here today, doesn't go through it very well. It's more designed for things like inks, artists, stuff like that, rather than putting thicker paints like we do, okay, in modeling. That's not to say, you know, it won't do it, it will do it. It's just it tends to get a little bit cloggy, a little bit spitty. If you're in drier, not very humid conditions, especially if it's dry, it tends to dry on the needle very, very quickly, okay? So, you know, as I said, don't be sort of drawn into things like, oh, the smaller the needle, I'll be able to do smaller lines. Don't forget, you'll be doing bigger things, and trust me, anything from 0.35, 0.2 is fine for doing anything you're likely to do, and you'll see it later when we do camera work on these Spitfires, things like that, that you can go down very, very fine, put in a very, very nice line without too much messing about at all. But just remember, your budget. Stick to your budget and get what you can for your money, okay? If your budget, as I say, I would say a good budget is £200. £200 will get you a £100 airbrush and a £100 compressor, and if you speak to a dealer nicely, he'll throw in things like hoses and cleaners and all those bits that go with it. And that way you've got a good setup to get started. Don't be fobbed off with what you can find on eBay. There's some airbrushes on there that are £15. I've got, to be honest, I have a leaflet. I'm not going to get it out because it's got the company name on it. I get sent this junk from companies who do cheap airbrushes which are made in Japan. They are offering me their airbrushes for £4.50 each. You can imagine what it's going to be like. Okay, the retail on it is around about £15, all right? But you know, you can buy a carton and it works out. They're £4.50 each. What are you really going to get for £4.50? It will probably work perfectly well the first time, maybe the second or third, but then something's going to wear out. It's going to be cheap metals, things like that. Stick with your guns, stick with a branded manufacturer if you can. That way you'll have a good airbrush to go through. I've had guys come in here and they brought their airbrushes and I can't even pronounce the name on it. I don't know where it's from, something else like that, and they said, oh, I have real trouble doing this and that. They use a quality airbrush and have no problem at all, because you do pay for what you get in this trade. And certainly, you know, there's far too much rubbish out there which you can get conned with, and it'll give you bad results and you'll think it's you. It's probably not you, it may be your equipment. All right, so there we go. That's airbrushes and paints. That's how actual airbrushes work and everything else like that. So what we're going to do, clear a bit of space, get some towel down here, and we're going to show you about setting up.